I am not the biggest fan of Stargate Universe, but I'm going to argue that we desperately need a conclusion of SGU if we're going to restart the Stargate franchise. Welcome to SciTrek, your sci-fi TV and movie channel. I am hopeful that in 2024 we're going to get a return of Stargate Command, that we're going to be getting a new Stargate series and a movie, probably a movie. But how does Amazon restart this franchise? Is it really as easy as some people think? Well, I have to argue that no, it's not going to be. A continuation after more than a decade is not a massively easy prospect, particularly not for something like Stargate. Now, you could argue Quantum Leap did it recently and they did it very well, but that was a completely different kettle of fish. It was a far more focused, far smaller universe that they were exploring. It was very simple to just have somebody new go into a new quantum accelerator. Stargate is different. Imagine for a second that the whole show was real. Imagine the technological advancement over 10 years of Stargate SG-1. We went from running through the Stargate that we could barely operate with machine guns and getting our asses handed to us every week, to, by the end of that decade, having warships that were pretty much the baddest thing in the universe, with weapons that could cut through Goa'uld shields like they weren't there. We went from knowing nothing about the universe to becoming the slayer of gods by the end of it. Now, another 12 years has gone by. So, how do you restart that franchise? What tone do you set? How do you explain what's happened in the last decade? There are massive decisions that need to be made. For example, will the Stargate be known to the public now? Because that changes what Stargate is dramatically. All of these things have to be done. So, why am I bringing this into Stargate Universe? Well, it seems to me that a nice way of restarting the franchise is to complete what was started all those years ago. Finish off the circle. Do something that saves the crew of the Destiny. And through that, explain an awful lot of what's gone on in the last 12 years. Let me explain. So, if you had a mission at Stargate Command, and the plan was to go and save the Destiny crew, you could have an awful lot of stuff sort of in the background that explains what's happened in the last few years, so that we can infer a lot of the history without them actually having to blatantly tell us. So, for example, if the public do now know about the Stargate, there are lots of ways that you could visualize that without actually having to point it out, as it were. You know, you could have the Stargate Command is no longer military. You can show the gate in the middle of a city or something like that. We could get to see a lot of the starships, for example, that we now have. So, are we on a BC 305, BC 306? These are the sort of things that fans desperately want to know because, again, that could be part of the mission. We could learn what's going on in the universe as a whole. Are there any new villains knocking around? That could also be brought into this mission to go and save SGU. Maybe there's a reason why we have to go and save the crew of the Destiny, or why we have to go to the Destiny to solve a problem we're now facing in the universe. Again, a nice, easy way to introduce a lot of this stuff without actually having to sort of bang on about it. I like the idea actually that we at the SGC have to go to the Destiny for some reason that's going to tie into the reason why the franchise is coming back. Now, we could have a storyline where actually the universe has been quite quiet for the last 12 years. We've had to deal with the Lucian Alliance, really, but nothing else. There's not been a big Goa'uld uprising or a new threat like the Ori or anything like that. But some new threat has emerged, and it's something to do with the ancients, and that there is something on the Destiny that will help us resolve that or understand this new threat. You know what I'm going to say now? I'm going to say the Furlings. I'm sorry, but I just think that would be the perfect villain for the new Stargate series. And I think it'd be a really cool twist. This peace loving race has come back, and now, for some reason, they're a problem. Let's do that. That's going to cause comments. Get into the comments and tell me whether you think that's a good idea or not. and then read the previous comments, and I bet you within 5 or 6 comments, you will read somebody say, evil Ewoks. It's bound to happen, and I love every single one of you that write that comment, because that means you've been watching our lives. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification so you miss none of our new videos, and most importantly, leave a comment. It's a community after all. We want to know what you think too. So what are the chances the new Stargate franchise could return with a conclusion to SGU? Well, we've heard several rumours going back over a year now that actually Robert Carlyle was being approached by Amazon and MGM to do something. Now, we then heard rumours that there was going to be a Stargate SGU animated movie. Now, I've since heard that that actually isn't true, or at the very least, somebody at MGM's told me it's not true. They actually told me they laughed when they saw that video about it. And I suspect it's not true. But talking to a couple of people, I am being told that actually this was a very early idea. That when there were talks about doing Stargate in cooperation with Warner Brothers, and this was back when apparently Bad Robot were involved in this discussion as well. Sorry, Bad Robot and Stargate just makes my blood run cold. That actually there was an idea for an animated movie, that this would be done very much sort of, think about the Babylon 5 The Road Home animated movie recently, that it would look very much like that, and that Robert Carlyle was approached about the possibility of doing that. Now, there would have been lots of reasons why actually this wouldn't have been a terrible idea. For one, Warner Brothers have the setup to do it. They could have done it quite inexpensively, and they could have done it very quickly. Again, look at what they did with Babylon 5. They were able to keep it really secret. Nobody knew it was happening. And then they released it really quickly. They released it on Blu-ray and 4K in these nice little box sets. It made really good money. And then they released it on the streaming. Again, made good money. They have a business model that would have worked for this. And Stargate fans would have gone nuts. Would have all bought it, even if you weren't big SGU fans. It would have also made sense in that a lot of the actors went into cryo. So in theory, they haven't aged at all in the last 12 years. But Eli would have done. So it would have created some interesting continuity issues. Continuity issues that would have been very easy to get around by animating the project. The fact that Eli is now skinny basically would have just been very easily explained by the fact he's been starving for years. But the fact that Rush, Telford, etc. hadn't aged, that would have been a little bit more difficult to explain. They might have also, though, struggled to get a few of those actors to return. Ming-Na Wen is quite busy with other projects, but they probably could have at least got her to come and voice something for the animated movie. So again, there are reasons why practically this probably wasn't a terrible idea, and in lots of ways I'm a little disappointed it's not happening. I am hearing, though, that we are going to get some comic book releases before the big movie event. Think about like what Star Trek have done recently, that just before a new series of Picard, etc., there's a short comic book run, something that builds up towards the new story and explains some of the background for it. I'm being told we're going to get to see exactly the same thing again with Stargate, and possibly a couple of books as well that'll explain a few things. So again, maybe we'll get SGU concluded in comic book form. I think that would be a massive shame, but at least we would find out what's happened, unlike the comic books we've already had about Stargate and the conclusion to SGU. Comic books that, if I'm honest, didn't make any sense and we need to pretend didn't happen. But the one last reason why I actually do believe we will get an SGU conclusion is something I told you about over a year ago now. That Mark Fergus has already talked about SGU to MGM and Amazon. So I talked to you about a development meeting that happened in late 2022. Mark Fergus, one of the guys that developed The Expanse and the person that we still strongly believe is going to be heavily influencing the return of Stargate, was talking to executives, and they were just bouncing ideas around about how they would return with the franchise. He was talking about the Planet Builders, which was a major part of the second season of Stargate Universe. The Planet Builders were, at the end of the day, probably the most advanced species we've ever got to see, assuming they weren't imagined, which is actually a slight possibility. But assuming they're not imagined and they were real, Mark Fergus seemed to be very enthusiastic about developing that story further. Now again, if we have a conclusion of SGU, we could bring that into it as well. Not only would we get to maybe find out what the mission of the Destiny was, and maybe how the planet builders tied into that, but that could then all be brought back into explaining or understanding the new threat back home. I can see a very simple way to tie all this together. And whoever ends up doing this really does have a really, really nice opportunity to actually do it in a clever way that makes us all very happy, but also gives them a foundation for a new Stargate franchise. Because however they decide to do this, whatever tone they decide to go with, however they decide this show will feel, is going to affect the franchise for a decade, if assuming it's successful. That is really, really important. We need a Stargate show that still feels like Stargate. And one really easy way to do that is to tie it into Stargate Universe and maybe also Stargate Atlantis. Because let's be honest as well, the Stargate Atlantis series needs a conclusion too. So is this a likely plan for Amazon and MGM? I'd say so. I think it's very likely that some variation of what I'm talking about is how they will do this, and that actually we're going to get to see the Destiny once again, because it just makes sense. Now, I am also going to say very quickly that just because something makes sense doesn't mean movie and TV creators will do it, because a lot of the time new creators come in and they want to do something new. This is one of the reasons why I'm really, really desperate for Mark Fergus to still be involved in this, or maybe, let's hope, they get Brad Wright involved, because at least then they will respect what came before. Because even though Mark Fergus is a new voice in the Stargate franchise, everything I hear about him suggests he is a massive fan, and that he would actually like to do something that does respect what came before. And if studios haven't learned that lesson by now, that if you are going to bring back a franchise, that if you do not respect what came before, it will fail, then these studios don't deserve to be allowed to make these TV shows. It really is a simple lesson. Respect the show that we love if you're going to bring it back. It's not complicated. But guys, get into the comments and tell me what you think. Does it make sense for SGU to be a part of the beginning because it would explain the ending? But guys, get into the comments and tell me what you think. Does it make sense to bring SGU back and to bring back the Destiny? Not just to conclude what happened before, but as a springboard for what is going to come. I actually think, and if it does, what way would you do it? How would you bring in the Destiny to make sense of what's come before? How would you bring in the Destiny to help make sense of a new? And guys, get into the and tell me, how would you do it if you were going to go and save the? And tell me, how would you do it if you were going to go and save the crew of the Destiny? Save Eli. What would you do, and how would you tie it into the new project? Would you at all, or would you just go and save the Destiny and have that as a standalone mini-series, say? Get to the comments and tell me exactly what you think. If you are new to the channel, please like, subscribe, hit that bell notification. It really helps us out, and you'll never miss any of our new videos. Also, go to patreon.com/SciTrek, where most of our new videos premiere first, and you get to see them without the adverts, you lucky bunnies. Finally, go and check out scitrek.co.uk, which is our dedicated website, and we do articles based on most of our videos, and we try to add a little bit more information for you to digest. As always, please stay safe, and I'll see you next time. I think it is actually very likely that some variation of what I'm being taught. I think it's very likely that some variation of what I'm being taught. What I'm being? What?